Good afternoon. I'd like to call to order the June 7, 2012 Oklahoma City Board of Adjustment meeting. Remind you to turn off your cell phone if you have not already. Our first order of business is approval of the minutes of the May 17th meeting.
Move approval.
I have a motion to approve the minutes of the May 17th, 2012 meeting.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Register your vote. The minutes are approved.
And Mr. Chairman, please note my abstention. I wasn't at the meeting.
Thank you. Continuous requests and withdrawals from staff.
We have two today. Item number 1, case number 13555 is requesting a variance to June 21st, and item number 8, case number 13545 is requesting a variance to July 5th.
Thank you. Would entertain a motion to defer case number 13555 to June 21st.
So moved. Second.
I have a motion and a second. Register your vote. It is deferred. Would entertain a motion to move case 13545 to July 5th, 2012.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Register your vote. That is approved. Any continuous requests or withdrawals from the public? Hearing none, we'll proceed with the first case.
Item number 2, case number 13541, request of Michael Pate for a variance to permit a 10-foot tall security fence located at 1400 South Skyline Drive.
Michael Pate, Century Security, Columbia, South Carolina. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I attended the meeting this morning for the River Overlay District. River Overlay District recommended that the fence be approved, as well as the River Overlay District Board, and they approved that this morning at 9:30. So I'm here before you today to ask the board to approve the variance for the 10-foot height. I know you've all heard this before. I'll go over it again. It's a 10-foot electric security fence powered by a 12-volt battery, which is also powered by a solar panel. It's also alarmed. This is a trucking firm, Old Dominion Freight Lines, one of my customers where I have probably about 40 or 50 fences all across the country. It is going to be installed behind the existing perimeter fence. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
How do you provide for emergency vehicles for that?
Emergency vehicle access is always has a Knox box switch, which is a universal key switch specifically designed for the Oklahoma City Fire Department emergency access crews. We actually install the box. They have the only key.
And there's only one access?
The access are where the gates are, so there's only one actual turn-off switch, which is at the main gate, which is all they require of us.
Okay.
And Mr. Pate, have there been, I believe in your application that you noted security issues. Have there been, in the area, have there been any with the specific?
None that I specifically know of, Mr. Jones. Ironically, one of the reasons Old Dominion Freight Line actually installs these devices, and I deal with the corporate security offers there on an ongoing basis, is what they're trying to do is basically reduce the overall population of crime. In other words, if they know that there's been a crime committed there with freight, they can immediately ascertain whether it's been done by someone in or outside of that particular site. So what they're trying to do is reduce the universe. So if they know there hasn't been a break-in, they immediately know there's been someone inside, so they reduce their universe of suspects. Very unusual that I've ever heard anyone tell me that, but that's one of the main reasons that they do it at ODFL.
Okay. Thank you. Are you aware of any other objections?
I'm aware of no objections.
Any objections? I'm sorry.
No, sir.
Wonderful. Well, I would move to approve.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve. Register your vote. You are approved.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Item number 3, case number 13561, request of John W. Nichols Scout Ranch for a variance to the hard surface paving requirement located at 12109 South County Line Road.
If you would, your name and address for the record.
Cameron Twyford. It's 205 Northwest 63rd with KFC Engineering representing the John W. Nichols Scout Ranch. The pool house that is located on the site was recently moved from a area of the ranch that was less accessible to an area that is now more accessible to the Scouts. The zoning ordinance requires that all off-street parking and access driveways be hard surface permanently paved, and we're asking for a variance from that requirement. 3 points I'd like to hit real quick. The area is a wilderness environment for the Scouts, and a paved road through the ranch would detract from the wilderness feel of the ranch. Paved road would also give vehicles on the site a higher priority, which is unsafe for the Scouts. We'd like to keep vehicle traffic to a minimum and keep speeds down. Second point, the main access to the ranch is from South County Line Road, which is an unpaved gravel road. All roads on the ranch are also unpaved gravel roads. Third and final point, accessibility has been provided for those Scouts with disabilities, special needs. Typically, vehicle traffic is not allowed past the first building on the site. If there is a special need, vehicles are allowed to travel along the existing gravel road to the pool house, and a gravel turnaround and parking has been provided with a sidewalk around the perimeter of the pool house, as you can see in the third picture there. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
No protests, I assume?
Okay. Are there any protests, concerns that have been expressed by anybody?
I'll move approval then.
Second. Have a motion and a second. Register your vote. You are approved.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Item number 4, case number 13563, request of FLRF LLC for a variance to the required number of parking spaces and the minimum aisle width located at 425 East Hill Street.
Yes, sir. Your name and address for the record, please.
Yes, sir. Chairman John Meek with First Commercial Management. I'm here to represent Mr. Levy today. He had some plane connection issues and had to rent a car and driving back from Dallas, so he's not here to represent himself. Our application has been submitted for this in reference. I think the narrative gives you quite a few details. I'm very pleased to be able to answer any questions you might have particular to that.
Is there any protest?
Not to my knowledge.
No. Make a motion to approve.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to approve the application. Register your vote. You are approved, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate the board.
Item number 5, case number 13564, request of Industrial Investments LLC for a variance to permit a barbed wire fence in the front side and rear yard located at 1103 North Morgan Road.
Good afternoon.
Your name and address, please, for the record.
Yes, sir. I'm Michael Collins, President of Industrial Investments. Address is 8228 Southwest 3rd Street, Oklahoma City. We're requesting a variance to the property is zoned R1. Statute for the rules say that it can only have a 4-foot tall fence, and we have issues on the property of theft, joyriding, trash dumping, all kinds of security things. The kids come out and joyride. About a month ago, they were out mudding in the vehicle. We had 2 stuck vehicles on the property, had to have one of them towed off. That's the main reason that we're adding the fence, as well as to use the property to run some cattle on it. I do have pictures if I could approach.
Certainly. I understand from your application that it's R1, and it received the R1 at the request of somebody who, I guess, had the property under contract and then did not close and intended to develop it into residential?
That was before our ownership, yes, sir.
Before your ownership?
Yes, sir.
Is there any fencing up now?
The individual owners on the west side of the property, which is a housing addition. About 80% of that area, they have fences along that side. Other than that, there are no fences on the property.
So the property's not secure because it's not fenced in its entirety?
That's correct. And we don't feel that a 4-foot fence will solve any kind of security issues.
Is the property being used for grazing, or is it leased, or is it just sitting vacant right now?
We had it rented, but we have taken the property back, so it's not under usage right now, and that's one of the reasons we need to fence it, so we can utilize the property.
Okay.
Those pictures, the top two pictures are pictures of the proposed fence that, as the crow flies, those two pictures are 1.5 miles from our property along highway, or I-40. The second pictures are pictures of some trash that's been dumped. I've got many others, but I just showed you a representative of some of the trash that's there. The last picture is of some of the ruts that were created on the property.
Okay. Board members, do you have any other questions for the applicant before we excuse him? And we've got 2 other people that have asked to speak on this application.
If I could comment, there was one written letter of request. I met with Ms. Arnold yesterday about 11 o'clock in the morning over her back fence. I was on my property, she was on hers. I talked to her, I met her, I answered the questions that she wanted to ask, and we came to a meeting of the minds. Matter of fact, she gave me 5 onions from her garden.
Okay, so her objection is essentially, has been taken care of and resolved?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right.
And I'll be glad to answer any questions that anyone might have.
Any other questions of the applicant before we ask the other 2 parties to speak? Could I excuse you for a bit? Okay. And invite Mr. John Ford. If you would, sir, just your name and address for the record.
My name is John Ford. I live at 3326 Northwest 45th Terrace in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. We own the property in the southwest corner there, the larger white area with a number 6 on it. And we didn't know anything about this until about a week ago. And our main concern is if we're going to have a barbed wire fence, what height is this fence going to be? And is this a precursor to trying to rezone that property in the near future? Those are the only questions that we have.
Staff, could you answer that question?
Any rezoning or any kind of application in the future would require notice to all of the surrounding property owners, and you would...
All right, so do you know that?
We're not aware of any...
Okay, do you know of the height of the fence?
The application says it is 6 feet tall with 3 strands of barbed wire along the top.
Okay. I have no further questions.
Thank you. And the next request to speak is from Mr. Ben Ross. If you would, Mr. Ross, just your name and address for the record, please.
Ben Ross, 1400 Greenway Drive, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. I also have pictures I'd like to submit to you. Should I do that now?
Yes.
Right now, there's a quasi-green belt that's been taken care of by the residents along that west border for up to 100 feet away from our fences. We have established some of them expensive fencing on the backside of our property. And my question is the fence going to be built on the property line? And since we've been taking care of that green belt to keep the snakes and varmints away, we would request that they would set that fence back 100 feet or so to keep from interfering with our property lines and the fencing that we have in place. And
Let me interrupt you at this point. I think that was one of Ms. Arnold's concerns, and it says in the application, the fence shall be located on the property line on the west boundary. So if it's okay, let me just excuse you at this point and invite the applicant back, and we'll let him respond to
Okay.
your concern. Sounds to me, and you may have talked to Ms. Arnold about this, it sounds to me as though they'd like to preserve the green belt.
Yes, sir. The green belt was never officially established. It was part of a previous application that was not fulfilled. So that commitment was not made. As a matter of generosity on my part, I allowed the people to plant gardens on the property because I didn't have a use for it. And some planted trees, and that was fine. But now I have a use for the property, and I need to use it.
So to Mr. Ross, what the applicant is saying is that the property belongs to him, and for a period of time, he had no objection that, trees were planted and that, as homeowners, you maintained that area and used it for gardens and other plantings, but it does belong to him. And right now, he wants to reclaim full right and use of that property and set the fence on the west boundary line. Please come back to the microphone. Sir, you haven't been... Okay. Mr. Ross.
How does a 6-foot tall, is this a chain link fence?
Pardon me?
Is this a chain link fence?
It is not. It says the fence...
Said 3 strands across the top. So.
Erect a 6-foot tall hog wire fence with 3 strands of barbed wire along the top.
How's that going to affect the, I don't know, $60,000 worth of fencing that are on the property line right now? Because we have a concrete brick fence on one end of mine is a stockade fence. There's pictures of those there. How's that going to affect our fencing if cows are going to be able to get against those? So
your east property line abuts and meets his west property line?
Correct.
Okay. And you've put up some fencing or some decorative fencing in your backyard along your
Correct.
east property line?
So that's why we're asking for a setback.
I assume, though, that if your fence or whatever structure you've put there is on your property line, that his fence would not interfere with that. It would just simply, be next to it. And I would think, there's property owners that, the security of that 160 acres would be in your best interest, too.
There isn't any trash or ruts on that green belt area, and never has been. It's not used for that. It's the property owners, as you can see by the pictures, and there's 3 elderly people that can't mow theirs, and we neighbors mow their part of that behind their house. And I understand property rights and that. I'm just saying, if we could get any setback, that would help in control of the varmints and everything else.
Okay. May I excuse you, sir? And we had somebody else that wished to speak, and I guess, have you signed up and asked to speak? Or? I have not. Please approach and give us your name and address for the record.
Matt Collins, 11012 Northwest 108th Terrace here in Oklahoma City. I'm counsel for Mr. Collins.
So you're speaking in favor of the application?
I am, and on behalf of Mr. Collins. And I'm here to speak to any kind of property line disputes I don't think exist. However, as Mr. Collins already said, there was a prior zoning application that happened years ago, and in part of that process, there was discussed a potential green belt, which never came to fruition. So this green belt that has been discussed, it's non-existent. There is no green belt. We do understand the issues that have been discussed here today, but there's no bona fide property line dispute.
It was simply an informal arrangement where there was no other use for the property, and people were allowed to kind of maintain it, and it's pursued as a green belt, but now, your intent is to reclaim full use of your property, is what it sounds to me like.
That's correct. And as far as the fence construction goes, the intent is to build the fence on the property line. However, where there's an adjacent landowner has a fence, obviously it's going to be built on the inside of that fence and should not in any way impact the fences that exist.
So they have no fears, the residents shouldn't be too concerned about their property, their fences being torn down to erect?
Absolutely, that's correct.
Okay. I think that was one of the primary
Right.
concerns.
Are there any access gates in this part of the property? So, I mean, and if you don't have another use for the property and just sits vacant, do you have an objection if the homeowners informally continue to use it with the understanding that it doesn't belong to them?
Well, I think that will have to be on a case-by-case analysis, and I don't want to go on the record to say that everybody to the west of this property can have access, but I'm sure the applicant will be more than happy to talk to individuals on a case-by-case analysis to discuss that issue.
And I think, to engage in a good neighbor,
Yes, sir.
relations and attempt to get along and settle any differences that may occur.
Certainly.
Mr. Ross, would you like to speak one more time before we? Please approach the microphone again. Until you reach the microphone, yeah.
I said I don't want to endanger the good neighbor policy. If cattle are going to be on that area and the fencing is up close, then we're going to have an odor issue. Again, there are some elderly people there. Also, I think that would give the varmints, they would have to go somewhere that's going to go in our yards. So if there's any way to get a setback, we'd like to do it because of that, especially since it's residential, and we're talking about cattle being right in our backyards now.
If that property is fenced like they're requesting, wouldn't there be a problem with adverse possession at some time?
It could get to that in time.
Yeah.
But what he's proposing wouldn't allow it to get to that because he's saying right now publicly, no, you don't have a right to this land. And of course, in adverse possession, you use it and operate it openly and notoriously. And he's saying, stop doing that.
Yeah. But if it was a fence and they were continued to use that, and if it went 15 years, then it would be adverse possession.
They could make that claim.
Yeah.
But I think what Mr. Collins is saying today would probably negate that in court because he's saying, no, you don't have a right
I understand.
on property.
And the fact, I believe I heard today that he authorized them or allowed them to use the property. There was no aggression behind the possession.
It wasn't
So-
a notorious
That's right.
possession.
Mr. Ross, thank you for your comments. I believe I've got somebody else from the public that would like to speak. If you would, sir, just give us your name and address for the record, please.
My name is Bill Toohey. I live at 1500 Greenway Drive. I apologize for my tardiness in not turning this in. I don't know how many years that property's been maintained by the previous homeowner besides me, but I've been mowing a good 30, 45-foot section of that property for at least 4 years since we bought the house, or close to 4 years, and we do have a gate that permits us to get back there to mow it. If I were to leave that unmaintained, I would have tall grass, like several places down the street from me that do not have a gate access to it. And I think the gentleman said they've been giving us the privilege to use that property as we needed. I don't know about you guys, but when I have to mow extra yard, I don't really see that as a privilege. I see that as a responsibility. And I'm afraid that if I do not have the access to that portion of the property, that I will have tall grass as tall as this podium here if it's not maintained.
And that would be the responsibility of the property owner.
Yeah. We also have a young child who we are concerned about. Obviously he's not really, doesn't ever go back there at this point in time, but having any kind of barbed wire or anything of that nature, if he does get to where he starts climbing fences when, we're afraid that he might get cut on that, tetanus, and all those kind of concerns. But that's, I would like to see a setback also for the green belt that was promised in the past.
And remember that as a homeowner, too, all of you have recourse to call Action Line and to ask for code enforcement to come out if there's, any violation or perceived violation and have it checked out. But his responsibility as the property owner is to maintain it and
Well,
keep it mowed.
you could take a walk down there and see examples of places where people do not have access now, and the grass is this tall. I walked it just the other day, and I don't see it being maintained. You know, fortunately, I've never had to call because I've just taken that responsibility on my own to mow that yard. So,
Okay.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Just to respond to a couple of the comments that have been made, the first 40 inches would not have barbs whatsoever. So that's over 3 feet tall that would not have barbs. That could possibly address the child issue. And then
So you're saying the hog wire is approximately 36 inches?
it's over that. It's actually 40 inches.
Okay.
Yes,
And
sir.
then
And
the
then-
barbed wire strands are above that.
I just wanted to make it clear that's another necessity, that's another reason why a fence is so, is required in this instance, is that the boundaries need to be defined. They haven't been over the past couple of years. There's been obvious security issues. You can see that one where just a huge pile of roofing has just dropped on this property. There needs to be added security, and there needs to be clarity on who has what property here, and I think my client deserves that.
And this does not, there's no prohibition from any homeowner whose property abuts this property from building your own fencing and your own privacy fencing for the protection of your children or to, for site fencing and so forth and so on.
And one other thing, I mean, this is 160 acres of property, and so that's a rather large piece of property that's located within the city limits. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. I don't know if that's abundantly clear here.
Thank you.
Thanks.
A question, maybe JJ can help me. If this property was zoned agriculture instead of R1, would this be a permissible fence?
Yes,
So it's an R1 problem.
that's why it's here.
And it sounds, and correct me if I'm incorrect, that the use of the property hasn't changed over the years. It's simply that somebody intended to buy the property, pursued the R1, got it approved, and then did not close, and the sale was not culminated. Mr. Ross is asking to speak again. If you have something new to add, please come forward.
Part of the 160 acres is zoned agricultural, I believe. And I was told they were going to run 10 or 20 head of cattle on the property that they're proposing to fence. And
Let me ask staff, can you run cattle under that zoning designation, but not under R1?
No, he can run cattle under R1 or AA as long as he has over 5 acres.
So he's entitled?
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Does anybody else have comments or questions? If not, I'm going to move approval.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the application. Register your vote. The application is approved.
Item number 6, case number 13565, request of ES Properties LLC for a variance to the required number of parking spaces located at 4400 Southwest 15th Street.
Your name and address for the record.
Sean Scott, representing ES Properties, 25 South Oklahoma Avenue, Suite 310. This variance request has been before this board in the past. It was approved approximately 6 months ago. We have a commercial Department of Defense, primarily design-build firm building an office space at this location. The variance to reduce the parking was previously approved. However, you can see there to the west, we added a storage building which is connected to the main office building, and therefore had to go back through the variance request process to go back to the previously approved number of spaces. This was approved this morning by the Riverfront Design Committee. And another issue is that the area where the 14 spaces are located to the east, it's the ones down that east side of the property. We're attempting to achieve LEED certification on this, energy efficient design certification on this property. We have a biofiltration swale planned to be there to reduce stormwater runoff. So this, if we were to put these spaces in, it would interfere with that as well. So we're just asking to go back to the previously approved number of spaces that we had.
I'll just note for other board members that Riverfront Design Committee in their meeting today did approve this. And you'll also see in your staff report that should the application, or should we consider approving this application, we should limit this variance to current use.
That would be my motion.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve. Register your vote. You are approved, sir.
Thank you.
Item number 7, case number 13562, request of Plaza Event Center, Inc. and Charles A. Shadid, LLC, for a variance to the nonconforming use regulations of the Alcoholic Beverage Consumption Overlay District located at 3715 Spring Lake Drive.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, before...
Could I ask the applicant to hold up just a moment, please?
If we may. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to disclose I'm chairman of the board for the Urban League, which is the owner of the property. The Mount Olive Senior College is just north of the subject property.
Are there any objections by the board members to having Mr. Jones participate in this hearing? Any objection by the applicant? No. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Please proceed, sir.
Basically, all our position is set out in our application, so I'll try to make this as brief as possible, because most of the exhibits that we have to present are in the application form. Basically, this is a situation where in 1982, we came before the Board of Adjustment and got a permit to operate a restaurant and private club on this property. That was the procedure at that time. For the last 30 years, this event center has been operating and without any complications whatsoever after the Board of Adjustment order granting the permit. We really, although I've attached to the application the various different licenses that have, over the last 30 years, that have been issued to this property, we've never had any problems or any up until this time as far as the trying to cancel out because of a non-conforming use situation. Because in 1985 they passed a new ordinance that stated that if you go 6 months without conforming use or without a license, then your license is canceled. But since 1985, there's no application ever made to cancel this license. The last application was made on this property, which we attached a copy of it to the application, was in last mixed beverage license, which expired 7/28/2011, around 11 months ago. We've attached to the application the drawings on the parking and layout, which indicates and shows very clearly that we have a situation that unless this property is used as it was built for, you have no other application. The photograph shows a little clearer picture of exactly what we're using the property for. You have your number one application. I mean, the number one exhibit shows the outside of the building, and the other two photographs shows the extensive amount of repairs, remodeling, and equipment that is being used at the present time. The building is set up for an event center. It's set up for multiple uses of multiple bathrooms, dance floor, second floor, seating, a sound system, light system, everything is in the building. And without this use, we're talking about $1 million non-use of a building for any other purpose. Basically, personally, I don't even think that it was necessary that I even come before the board, because I feel like we've got a vested right because of the prior order given by the Board of Adjustment to use this property, and I don't think that another order or municipal order that given 5 years later, because at the time this Board of Adjustment hearing was made and this order given for this property, at that time, there was no 6 months in the first order. That ordinance came into effect at a later time. It more or less, it's after enacted legislation, and I personally don't think it's applicable, but I either had to come before the Board of Adjustment or I had to go file a lawsuit against the city. This seemed like the friendliest and easiest way to do it. I'll be glad to answer any questions you have.
If board members don't have any questions for the applicant at this time, I would like to excuse you, sir, and invite Dr. Valerie Thompson. If you would, your name and address.
Good afternoon. I'm Valerie Thompson, President and CEO of the Urban League here in Oklahoma City. I also serve as the General Manager for Urban League Mount Olive, LLC. And I am speaking in opposition of the variance due to a safety and security issue. We just recently purchased and built $6.2 million senior residence that is adjacent to this property in reference, and 60 units that seniors reside in this particular facility. We are concerned that the nightclub, as it is an issue, and we've been working with the police department to remedy some of the problems that we've been having there.
Could I interrupt you for just a minute? You're characterizing this as a nightclub, and it's being characterized as an event center.
Exactly.
What is it?
It's a nightclub.
Does that mean it operates continuously, or that
it operates on the weekend, from what I understand? And just give you some history, I was a previous resident in that area, and in the early 1960s to the 1980s, that was a affluent neighborhood, and that used to be a grocery store that the community could go in and purchase groceries. It has turned into something less than desirable for that neighborhood. And so working with the community, we made the investment in housing in that area, and we are bringing economic development back into that area. The city Chamber of Commerce estimate that we, just by building that particular facility, we are bringing roughly $1 million annually to Oklahoma City, just because of those residents living there. And so I'm concerned that the investment that we made there in turning this into a nightclub that could go Monday through whenever, and serving alcohol and disturbing the residents that back adjacent to that particular property is a security issue.
I understand that, but at the time the senior housing was built, the event center of the nightclub was in operation.
The facility, the event center was there. It did not operate on a continuous basis. When there was events that could be booked there, I believe the owner would rent it out. But it sounds like what he's doing now is asking permission to expand that, and that gives us great concern.
Now, this may be a question for Mr. Shadid, but when's the last time that this was an operating as a nightclub or event center?
They operated, from what my understanding, there's events that happen there from time to time, but it's not a continuous continuous thing.
But the nightclub, I guess, atmosphere that you're concerned about, when was the last time that was?
I'm not aware of anything of that nature. Just because I'm not involved with the social scene, but the residents tell me that they are concerned at night when things happen in that particular area. So I do know it's frequent. I don't know how often it happens. And in addition to that, there are several churches right there in the area. We are the co-owner with Mount Olive Senior Cottages, with Mount Olive Baptist Church. They weren't aware of this ordinance, and neither were we until recently of this particular variance. So we, again, are really taken aback that the particular applicant would like to do this. It does not bode well with the community, and I'm really concerned about the seniors that currently reside there.
Thank you.
I assume she's talking about the property to the north of the property there. There's a large fence behind that property, and there's a large alley, probably 30 foot between the building and that property. And to my knowledge, we've never had any complaints from those residents about this, or operation of the building or the property. And we need to point out that this property has been zoned and used for this purpose for 30 years. This property's only been built maybe for the last 10 years.
And I think we understand that, and I think the concern extends beyond the representatives of those housing units to some of the churches in the area, and we've been provided some crime statistics in an effort to show us that the residents and the churches and others that surround your building, your facility, have some concerns for quality of life and safety and crime. And I as a homeowner, and we all, I think, can understand that. So we balance your right to pursue your business interests with their right as residents and citizens of the community to have a safe environment and a reasonable quality of life in the area surrounding them.
I understand that we have to balance that against the proposition that, this is the only event center in the whole northeast quadrant of Oklahoma City. These people are entitled to an event center or use of one if they like it. We never hear anything about Bricktown. They got 8 killings down there just last week. Before that, there's another 5 killings, another before that. But we don't hear anything about Bricktown. It's okay for them to do whatever they want to down there. But when we have any kind of club outside of Bricktown, we have the same objection. The only thing I can tell you is that we cooperate 100% with the police department. We have never had any objection to the way we operate. This is a completely new operator. He hadn't operated before, so we feel that he will.
Go ahead. I was going to say, Mr. Chair, can you just clarify? I believe the chairman asked Dr. Thompson about the purpose, whether this, because I've heard event center and I've heard nightclub. And can you tell me, can you clarify what this, I know it's called an event center.
It has to be an event center because of the fact that we're within 300 foot of the residence and 300 foot of the church.
So this is not going to be a nightclub?
It's not a nightclub, it's an event center.
And as such, it does not continuously operate during the week. It is rented or
yes,
for special events.
Yes.
Is it in use most weekends?
Not most weekends. For the last year, I would say it probably hasn't been used that much. The last been used on the weekends mainly, but never during the week. Usually Friday and Saturday.
Okay. Dr. Thompson is asked to speak again, and I think I've got another gentleman that would like to speak.
Thank you. As I say, our property butts right up against this, is what they're calling an event center. During the day, there is no activity in this particular event center. The residents in Northeast Oklahoma City use particularly events, when they want to have events, they use Langston OKC. They use Metrotech, that is right down the street on Spring Lake Drive. They use various facilities to do various event activity. I do not think that this is what the intent of this event center, what they're saying it's going to be, and therefore I strongly think that it would pose a significant problem with the residents there, and I am concerned about the quality of life, particularly because what we're aiming to do is increase the quality of life and the economic development in that area.
Thank you. Yes, sir, you'd like to speak to this application? Your name and address for the record, please.
Chairman Austin, thank you. I'm very sorry I neglected to sign up. My name is Richard Labart. I represent Park Estates, which is the shopping center immediately across Spring Lake Drive from the subject. And also here today are Ms. Vera Black and Michael Alexander. They each operate church ministries and are tenants of my client. Our primary concern is that this property, well, first of all, let me just say, none of us were involved in city government. I just started law school in 1982. None of you all were involved in the decision to grant this variance in the first place. And, you know, the wisdom of whether that should have been done back then may be questioned, but certainly, it's 30 years ago. But we've had a lot of rich history since then. And now we can see that this has been a horrible situation for this community. And it's a situation that we ought not resurrect by your action today. The applicant is not entitled to any sort of grandfathering. They allowed this to go dark for over 6 months, and so we're starting from ground zero. And so each of you gets to analyze this according to your best judgment and according to your consciences. This is not a situation where someone is accused of a nuisance and they say, well, you came to the nuisance. You moved there knowing what it was. They are starting from scratch, and so we all get to take a fresh look. There's no question that my client has churches in there within 300 feet, which is why Mr. Shadid is seeking to characterize this as an event center. That's a sham. It's a pretext. I obtained a ream of crime statistics over the last decade for this area. We invited Lieutenant Kimberlin, who is one of the people in charge of vice in our police department here. He's sitting here today. I invite you all to allow him to speak and conduct any Q&A that you think appropriate. This is a horrible situation for this community. It ought not be resurrected. It's immediately adjacent to senior citizen retirement homes, and R1. Spring Lake goes right into residential, block and a half away. Anyway, I'd be happy to answer any questions or attempt to. I thank you very much for your time.
Mr. Labarth, what about his right to utilize his right? Now, he says he's represented to us today that this is an event center, regardless of what we as, citizens may feel, but he has represented that this is an event center, not a nightclub. What about those concerns, and how are we to balance those interests, his right to use his property versus the concerns that you've raised?
Well, the Able Commission would not grant him the necessary licenses to function as a nightclub or a dance club. And so I'll leave you to form your own conclusions about why we're now characterizing this as an event center. I understand that Mr. Shadid, through one or more other entities, owns a couple of other places in this immediate vicinity. One is called the 3-6 Lounge, I believe, which is right next to, or right close to this one. And then there's also something that he calls the ICE Event Center, which he lost his attempt to get a non-conforming use variance before this very board, and then went to district court, as was his right, and wound up compromising with the city and was granted an ABC2. ABC2 says you can operate as a restaurant that sells alcohol so long as the food sales predominate. And that may be a pretty good question as to whether...
I'm going to interrupt you for a moment. I want to be careful that we don't characterize each other inappropriately, and that Mr. Shadid is not portrayed as being anything other than an honorable member of this community. You may disagree with the use and the impact of the event center that he owns, but let's don't, cast anything personal in terms of, what his intent might be or his character.
Very good, Mr. Austin. And of course, that was his right to go into district court, and I make no comment about the propriety of that other club and whether it's has over 50% sales. That's not for me to decide, and I'm sorry I commented upon it. But it is, I think, fair to say that this gentleman, Mr. Shadid, does have an interest in other similar facilities in the immediate vicinity, although they're quite small in comparison to this one. I mean, this is an enormous facility and draws quite a crowd. And I think that Lieutenant Kimberlin could confirm that it's essentially a weekend night operation, or historically so.
And that's
anyway,
fine.
I apologize for any personal comments.
That's all right.
Mr. Chairman.
Might just answer Mr. Jones' question. This property's zoned C3, so it's perfectly fine to have an event center there right now. He can operate an event center. It's the fact that they want the ability to serve beer and mixed beverage and have it licensed there. They could cater, I suppose, but it's eligible for an event center right now.
Board members, would you like to hear from the police officer?
I would.
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Doug Kimberlin. I'm the supervisor over the Vice Enforcement Unit. And for the sake of our patrons here, we're charged with the investigation and of liquor law violations and compliance with Title 37 and Chapter 5 of the Municipal Code. And I must say I'm not here to advocate either for or against this particular establishment, but to provide you guys with information so you can make the best decision possible. To answer a couple of questions that have already been asked, this has been an event center in the past. Previously, a county beverage permit was applied for in April. The applicant was Mr. Marcelo Baldion, who is an employee of Mr. Shadid. On the behalf of the police department, I did protest that because it was within 300 feet of a church, and the statutory limitation of the 6-month rule had come into play, and that protest was filed in district court. The applicant chose to withdraw that application, and a hearing was never came to. Historically, this has been operated solely on the weekends, generally Friday, Saturday night. Past tenants, and I'll explain tenants in a minute, past tenants have attempted to operate this establishment past 2 o'clock. So most of the tenants in that area, to include the ICE Event Center down the street, which was mentioned, choose to try to go after this particular designation so they can operate past the 2 o'clock hour. I did go by there today, and I took some photographs of the property as recent as 9 a.m. this morning, if the board would like to see those. This first photograph is a picture of the inside. As you can see, there's no significant remodeling going on right now that I can see. The other two photographs are just a full-face picture of the front and the back, and there appears to be no construction going on in the outside. The other question that was asked was when was the last time this place operated? The previous owners actually were residents of Edmond, and they operated this event center, and it did operate extraordinarily similar to that of a club. They operated on a Friday and Saturday night, and we went in due to numerous complaints with the Health Department and the Able Commission, and the Health Department did close the facility because the kitchen was not operational and they were not serving food. The amount of, at that time, the amount of money it would take to bring that kitchen up to operational standards, to fire code and health code, would be very significant, and that owner chose to close. That owner was also charged in municipal court, and I believe in district court, with various violations with regards to license violations, which included unlicensed security guards and unlicensed employees, as well as the managers themselves not being licensed. So since that is closed, it's been about 18 months, I believe, since the last time that is closed, and then the license lapsed when it expired. The other question or thing that was brought up was the 3-6 Lounge. It is next door immediately to the east in the same building. So between the ICE event, or the Plaza Event Center, and the 3-6 Lounge, there are a couple of businesses that are not open on the weekends. The 3-6 Lounge is owned by an LLC called Nelson Entertainment LLC. It was previously owned by a gentleman named Nelson Figueroa, and through several years and some non-compliance issues, he chose to sell that LLC to an individual named Elijah Mohammed. He continued to operate that LLC after achieving a corporate officer change through the Able Commission.
That doesn't seem fair to me, allowing him to be talking about another operation completely, when it's completely out of line with what we're here for. We're here for a event center. We're not here for every other club in Oklahoma City that's had some obstruction or something.
This body is quasi-judicial rather than judicial, and so they can't rule any objection or anything like that, but they can decide if they want to hear this testimony as to its cumulative effect, because this is a club next door to another club. They could hear it or choose not to hear it, but it would be in the discretion of the board.
So I would ask my fellow board members about whether they want this testimony to continue or to continue with that excluded.
Well, I think for me, I understand the objection that has been raised, and I would prefer to have the focus on the event center, but more so from my standpoint, I am curious as to the public safety issues and crime in that particular area. That's what is of interest to me. But
And to answer your question, Mr. Jones, Mr. Shadid is the landlord for that particular club as well, and the reason for presenting that information was the question was asked, and also to try to give you an idea how he allows his tenants to run. Whether you choose to view that favorable or non-favorable is up to you.
Any other comments or questions for the... Thank you for your testimony.
Okay, is that all?
At this time, yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir. If you would, your name and address for the record, please.
My name is Michael Alexander, pastor of the Church Triumphant, 1027 Northeast 36th Street. I'm also a homeowner within the vicinity of the event center, been a resident there for the past 25 years. I am personally concerned about the safety of my congregants that are in the Park Estates building directly south of the event center, especially in the premise of the past, I would say 8 months, when there have been events at the center at night. In the daytime, we don't have any problems with the event centers, but in some of the weekend events, we've called the police out on one occasion because of bullet holes that have gone through our window and lodged into our soundboard edifice that we have set up. Called the police and they dug the projectile out of the soundboard. As well as recently, we have currently, and I was going to call our landlord, Mr. Shepard, we have another bullet hole that has pierced through the window, pierced the curtains, and we were just as of last night looking for the projectile. I'm thoroughly concerned. We had several months ago a sleepover with our children, and we had our own security, and in that facet of security, we broke up several fights right in front of our church, as well as persons urinating in the parking lot, broken glass, while our children were securely locked in. So I have a serious concern about the escalation of security if a liquor license is expressed.
And I think that's clear, and I think the other, people that are here, about this application have a similar concern about the safety and the quality of life in the area. Thank you for your comments.
You bet.
Mr. Shadid?
You know, they say about the other club that in the shopping center, they didn't say anything about, I went to 7 churches in that same shopping center that the ICE Event Center was. 7 churches. So it's right there in the same shopping center. So there is nothing that says I'm just leasing to clubs, and that's all. You know, it's very easy to say that to close up a place and leave $1 million investment go to pot and not of any use whatsoever. It's very simple and easy to say that when it's not your money. When it's your money, it makes a little bit of difference, I would assume. Well, the only other thing that I would like to mention is that they did have a little problems with that. Nothing outside, is all inside. The last tenant, and we did get rid of him as soon as we found out about it. This is a completely new tenant. He has not had any problems out there. And as far as all the problems they were talking about, I don't think anybody could say that within the last year or 2 years they've had any problems in that parking lot whatsoever. They may have had some problems as far as the licensing and health department or something of that nature. But as far as I know, for the last 2 years, there has been no riots, no gangs in those shopping centers because we patrol them. We make sure there's no, because when they ran them off of 23rd Street, they all came to the northeast and came to this shopping center. We talked to them and have a good repertoire with the police department that's right real close to us. We made sure that they have no gatherings in that parking lot at night in either shopping center, because I own the one across the street too. And Sandwich, the one that Mr. Shepherd talked about. So we cooperate. This is a brand new operator. They have nothing against him whatsoever. We haven't had any problems in that shopping center that I know of for the last 2 years or more. No congregation in the shopping center. At 2 o'clock they get out. They're supposed to leave the parking lot, and like I say, we cooperate 100% with the police department, and I don't think they have any objection to or anything they can say one way or the other against me. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
The information that Mr. Shadid provided over criminal activity in the last 2 years, I don't know that would be totally accurate. We've had numerous shootings in that parking lot, again, most of them related to the other club. One in which actually a convicted felon security guard had fired a shotgun. The most recent one was this last weekend where there was a shooting in the parking lot. So there is an ongoing issue, I think, that the residents have expressed with criminal activity ongoing in the parking lot, and it is an ongoing problem.
But it's a problem with the people who are at the nightclub more than the people that are using the event center. Is that what you're saying?
That is true, and when the ICE or the Lexus Club, which is the previous tenant, when they were in operation, historically that type of activity continued. The source of the activity right now are the patrons from the 3-6 Lounge, so that would be accurate.
Well, Mr. Shadid, I appreciate your presentation and your application, and as I evaluate things, I think that you as a business owner are entitled to utilize your business in the manner that you deem appropriate, so long as it is within the confines of the law. And that is what as I've sat here and evaluated all that I have heard today, I have to look then at the law and why you are here today and the statutory provisions that have the 4 elements that you must satisfy. And when I am having difficulty hearing all the evidence that has been presented, looking at the crime statistics that we've received, and quite frankly just reflecting over the years of that environment, the community, a community that I have to say know very well. What I am having difficulty in as I evaluate your application, is getting over one of the elements, which is that it would not cause substantial detriment to the public good.
I didn't hear you say.
That it would not cause, that the granting of this application for variance would not cause substantial detriment to the public good. Whether we listen to the I guess, testimony of Pastor Alexander, or we just rely almost exclusively on the crime statistics. I agree that I don't believe that I agree with you that your tenant, I'm sure that's a new tenant, and we don't know what your tenant would do, but I have every confidence that he or she would be a good tenant. But it's not necessarily the tenant, but it's the company that the tenant would bring to the community. And that is what is difficult for me as I sit here and evaluate this, to get over the fact that it would not cause substantial detriment to the public good. And so for that reason, I am not going to be able to support your application, and would move that your application be denied.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to deny the application. Register your vote. Mr. Shadid, I'm sorry, your application is denied.
Yeah.
Am I needed any longer, Mr. Chairman?
Pardon me?
Am I needed any longer?
You are not. Thank you very much for your testimony. Case number 8 has been continued. Item number 9 on the agenda is, at the first regular meeting in June of each year, the office of chairman and vice chairman shall be open to nomination. The office of chairman and vice chairman shall be elected by a majority vote of the board. It would be the chair's preference, if it's acceptable to the other board members, that until we meet again as a full board, that we defer this action.
That'd be my motion.
Second.
That's necessary.
I have a motion and a second to defer till the next meeting where we have a full board. That action is approved. This time, a motion to adjourn would be.
So moved.
We are adjourned.